Awesome. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm joined here by the Chairman for ActionAid International. Chairperson for ActionAid International. Could you please introduce yourself, ma'am?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for inviting me for this interview. I'm Irene Ovonji-Odida. I'm from Uganda. I'm a lawyer. I focus on human rights. As you mentioned, I'm currently the chairperson of ActionAid International. And what else did you want to know in my background?
I think that should be okay. So you just finished the WISE debate talking about overcoming challenges, lessons from other sectors. And in that session, you did mention women empowerment in education. Can you please enlighten us on that?
Yes, I think it's been recognized over time by policymakers and also from the work that we've done as ActionAid that women, maybe because of the roles that they play in raising families, in raising children, and in the social responsibilities that they have in the community, have a major role in shaping people, in shaping their values, and also by doing that, enabling them to access opportunities that may exist in the community. So we find that both for that reason, because women play such a big part in molding other human beings, but also in their own right as human beings who in many cases have been disadvantaged, that in order to build up education and to achieve quality education and access to education, you do have to focus on women. So you have to focus on girls in school and enable them to take advantage of the opportunities that exist, and also to focus on women as mothers who can play a role in helping their own children.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned that women as mothers should play a key role.
Yeah.
So can we just...
They actually do.
Okay. Yeah. So what are the two main... Let's try and outline two main roles that women can play in the lives of their children when it comes to education.
Yes. Well, quite often you find that women are the ones who take care of children in the families and in the communities. So they're able to influence, and when they have information, for example, information about health or about sanitation, they are able to apply that information directly to improve the lives of the children and of their families. Many programs that want to improve the situation of the communities need to focus on women and enabling women in order for them to be able to impact on the whole community, just because of the nature of the roles that women play in our communities. In addition to that, the second aspect that I talked about is that women and girls are often denied opportunities because of disparities in the perception in the communities about the roles that women should play and about the resources that should be spent on women. And so you'll find in communities or in families where there's poverty, if a choice has to be made between educating a girl and a boy, the choice will be for the boy. So unless you have programs or unless you build up understanding in the community that it's as important to educate a girl as it is to educate a boy, that is another way in which one needs to influence how education is done and understanding of the space of women in education to create better change. So both because of the roles they play, but also because in their own right as human beings, they have a right to education and a right to better quality of life. It's important to focus on women and women's rights. And for ActionAid in our strategy, that's one of the core things that we do, is to look at women's rights, to see how to build literacy for women who haven't had an opportunity to get formal education, how to address the issue of resources standing in the way of access to education.
So how did you as a woman coming from Uganda rise to the heights that you have achieved?
Well, I don't know if I'd call it heights. I think it's something that probably anybody could do, but perhaps I've been lucky. One of the things was just education itself. The fact that I went to school and was able to access a higher education, and also went to law school in Uganda, in a public university, Makerere, and had the good fortune of having lecturers who understood the value of women and also the value of enabling girls in law school. That helped me in my own way. The other thing that I would say was an influence for me in my life and in any achievements that I've made has been just being involved in community work. I had an interest in women's equality right from law school, from what I had learned about human rights. And straight out of law school, I went into the women's movement. I got involved in the Women Lawyers Association as a volunteer in a legal aid program that we had just started in about 1988. And through that, participated in legal aid and also in legal education programs in rural communities, outside of the capital, just going out on weekends as part of that program organized by FIDA Uganda. I learned a lot of skills, around leadership, the kind of skills you don't necessarily learn in a classroom, not even at university. I also was able to network with many people. So there are many women I interacted with who were older than me within the legal fraternity, who over time have been a resource to me. People like our current speaker of the Uganda Parliament was the chairperson of the women lawyers at the time. So through that kind of voluntary work, I would say that I was able to get resources, access to resources, other human beings, information and skills that have been a major part of my personal achievements and any contributions I might have made. The other thing that I want to mention there is that it's not just about individuals. I think there's individual interest and individual opportunities that enable one to progress. But there also are things that need to be done systematically, or opportunities that come up through organizations that themselves, or through collective, that can also be stepping stones for women and for girls, people like yourself as you progress in your life. I'm thinking specifically about how ActionAid International, some years ago before I went into it, made a decision to transform from a British or European-based NGO, international NGO, into one that was truly international. And so to create new structures that were democratic and that were international. And by doing that, setting up an international federation, it then created space for people from the South, like us, to also get into leadership within that international NGO. And this is quite unique. I go for a forum annually of international NGOs that meets in Berlin, organized by a forum called Berlin Civil Society. It brings in chairpersons and CEOs of international NGOs. And although the forum is open to INGOs from anywhere, predominantly the ones that are there are those that are northern based. So you will find, in addition to ActionAid, the others which attend are group organizations like Oxfam, CARE, Amnesty International, and so on, a whole range, Civicus, Greenpeace, many of the big ones. What I realized when I go into that forum is that there are very few where you will find people from the South in leadership. So you also have to have structures created to enable people, from groups that are not necessarily dominant, including women, to enable them to access. Linking that back to some of the opportunities in our countries, in my own country, Uganda, it's one of the countries that has got many more women in leadership than many other countries, not just in Africa, but I would say in the world. The percentage in the parliament could be about 25% perhaps of women. But that was because at a national level, structures were created through the constitution to have space for women. So affirmative action provisions in the constitution that reserved space for women in leadership. So you also need to have systematic or institutional ways or mechanisms to help those who are disadvantaged to access opportunities. In this case, it's women. There also are other groups. There might be people with disabilities or people from poor backgrounds. So one needs to have systematic ways that then enable those who have an interest and ability to go through and to overcome the normal barriers that others from their group would face.
Thank you very much. I just have one last question. Regarding budgets that are allocated to education, on the forefront, it appears to be very huge, but then you don't really see the impact it's making. Can you please throw some light on that situation?
Yeah. There is a recent study that came out in East Africa. I forget the organization that commissioned it, but it was looking at education in the 5 countries. And one of the things that was found was that a key factor affecting the quality of education is the quality of the teachers. And the quality of teachers is very much related to the conditions that they have, the terms and conditions. That is one. Another thing that's also been realized is that kids, which you'd imagine it's probably seems to be straightforward, is that children in school are affected by the conditions outside school, in their homes or in the communities. For example, if on your way to school you go through an environment that is violent, an environment that is not safe, you'll find that it will put off children from going to school or affect how they perform. So what I'm trying to say is that there are many different factors that affect education. Financing is a key thing, is a core issue. And overall, what ActionAid has found is that financing of education is not sufficient, as a percentage of national budgets. But even where the budgets have been improved, the funds do not necessarily go into the right things. So
why?
Well, that's the question. That is the question. And I think that the challenge that faces us is what's the solution? I think we have to identify through research, and this is some of the things that ActionAid does, is to do research and establish what is actually causing the problem. For example, I think it was in Tanzania, where a study was done by a partner organization of ActionAid, a national NGO. What they found when they were trying to see what keeps children out of school was they found it was user fees, the contribution that had to be made by families. And so when they realized that was the problem, then they did some lobbying to have user fees removed, which was done. And as a result of that, over 1 million kids the next year were enrolled in primary schools. So one has to do actual research in the particular place to find out the real problem in that context, and then do some advocacy to have the policymakers change. As I mentioned earlier in the session, sometimes poor decisions by governments or even by international community are done because of lack of information. Another example I'd give that ActionAid has worked on is doing research to see the impact of IMF policies on education. And one of the things that we found was that the focus of the IMF on reducing expenditure of governments on wages has had, and because of that, freezing the intake of civil servants, including teachers, has had a negative effect on education. So as a result of that, the advocacy that we did was to convince the IMF that they need to change their policies and allow governments to improve the wages of teachers, because poor wages led to poor teachers, and poor teachers led to poor education.
Right. So then the issue with poor wages with teachers is actually not from the government, but it's from the IMF.
In some cases,
it's from the IMF policy.
In some cases, yes, you will find that it is international policies of institutions of that sort which have an direct impact on the policies that governments are able to adopt. And so it's important for international community also to recognize the responsibility that it has and the negative impact that it can have on issues like education. I think what this also brings out is that to have progress, there must be an integrated approach. You cannot, on the one hand, as an international community, say we are setting targets, the MDGs in education, and then on the other hand, have policies around, say, macroeconomic policies that prevent governments from having the policies that will then support education. So there must be an integrated approach that looks across the board at economics and social policy and puts the two together. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In one word, in one sentence, in one line, what do you think the way forward for education is?
I think the way forward is recognizing the importance of education, that education is key to development.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you very much.